Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Sean Fine. I'm the CEO of the Irish Bioenergy Association. This morning's webinar is number 43 in our bioenergy webinar series and the first of 2024. So I welcome you to this webinar and our kickoff for the 2024 series. This morning's topic is explaining specified biomass harvesting, realizing the biomass opportunity. We will run for the next hour. And if you have any questions or feedback during the course of the webinar, please submit that through the Q&A tab, which is at the bottom of the screen. So briefly, by way of introduction, I'd just like to introduce the Irish Bioenergy Association, as we have a number of participants on our webinar this morning who have not joined us previously. So the organisation was established in 1999. We're the representative body for the Irish bioenergy industry in the island of Ireland, and we cover the biomass, biogas, biomethane, biofuels, biochar, wood fuel, energy, crop sectors. Our main work is in the area of lobbying, advocacy, policy development, knowledge transfer, as a representative body for the sector. And we have a broad and diverse membership. And if there are any people on the call or the webinar this morning that would like to become members of the Irish Bioenergy Association, please feel free to get in touch with us. We also roll out a number of research and development and demonstration projects, including the small farm-scale biogas projects in biochar under the IrBEA programme, and a Just Transition project in the Midlands Bioenergy Development Project. We also roll out the wood fuel quality assurance scheme, which my colleague Noel will briefly outline later. Further information is available on our website, irbea.org. We also have a series of fact sheets, so if there's anyone that would like to view our fact sheets, they're available on our website. And there's also an additional fact sheet for the support scheme for renewable heat. And this is webinar number 43 in our series. And as you can see, we've covered a wide, diverse range of topics so far, right across the bioenergy sectors. And if there's anyone on this call that would like to participate in a webinar or present at a webinar, feel free to get in touch with us, as we're compiling our schedule for the next number of months at the moment. And we would be delighted to hear from you to discuss what you would like to present on. So please feel free to get in touch afterwards. Our next webinar will take place in 2 weeks' time. We go on Wednesdays at this time, 9:30 to 10:30. And full details of each webinar as they arise will be posted on our social media channels and also emailed out to attendees who have attended previously. So webinar 44 has been planned, and with details will be available in the coming days. I thank you for attending this morning's webinar. So today's webinar, we will have a presentation, first of all, by Noel Gavigan. Noel is the IrBEA Technical Executive. And then we will have a presentation or a discussion with Eugene Hendrick, who authored the report with Noel Gavigan, Kenneth Warrell, MD World Harvesting, and Donal Whelan, Technical Director with the Irish Timber Growers Association. So introducing our webinar this morning, at this webinar, the Irish Bioenergy Association will launch our Specified Biomass Harvesting document. This document was developed by IrBEA with contributions from members, but also associated organisations and stakeholders. Specified biomass harvesting can provide a significant biomass and renewable energy resource. The resource arises from a sensitive approach to harvesting the forest without adversely affecting on the future productivity of the forest or local ecosystem. And the byproduct, in addition to the harvest of timber and pulp products, is usually derived from the side branches and tops of the trees. And this webinar will focus on outlining the importance of this approach and the focus on productivity of the forest, local ecosystems and water courses. I would like to strongly acknowledge the authors of the document, Noel Gavigan and Eugene Hendrick, but also the expert contributions from Donal Whelan, Kenneth Warrell, Des O'Toole and Maurice Ryan. So thank you all for your contributions to the document. Our presenter this morning is Noel Gavigan. So Noel is the Technical Executive of the Irish Bioenergy Association. Noel also manages the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme and has extensive experience with the organisation, working with members in the bioenergy sectors across all the different areas. And if you would like to get in touch, my own contact information is available on screen. You can contact me by email, by phone, or by social media, as I'm happy to discuss any items or areas you would like to discuss further, or indeed if you'd like to participate in a future webinar, or indeed if you would like to become a member. So I'll stop sharing and I'll ask Noel now to share your screen. And Noel, if you can take us through your slides.
Hi, Sean.
And we'll then break for a discussion with our other panelists after your presentation. Thanks, Noel.
Now, just make sure it's working. Is it working correctly?
Just go to presentation mode, Noel.
Yeah, it should be jumping there. Now, can you see that correctly?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay, right. So good morning, everybody. What I'm going to do is introduce this report to you and a bit of the background to it, or a bit of the where the context is in terms of bioenergy, but also has a major impact in terms of forest management. And principally, the report is based on forest management. And as we get into the meeting, which you'll see where that comes about. As Sean just mentioned, we do also run the WFQA, the Woodfield Quality Assurance Scheme. Just a brief mention there, we have 78 certified members around the country and growing. So that's just a map we have on our website if you go to wfqa.org. And a small number of those would produce brash material, or well, sorry, specified biomass harvesting. And that's something we're going to address in this report. We've all used an old term called brash, and that is wrong. And it's something we've used it just to even advertise this webinar because that's what people are used to using that term, but it's actually something we've got to stop using as a terminology as a fuel product. Brash is something you leave on the forest floor and use it for trafficking. And we have to really get used to that terminology, and it's something it's going to be a bit of a challenge, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of slip-ups by everybody, including myself, as time goes on in how we use it. But the specific term is specified biomass harvesting. In terms of bioenergy, look, worldwide, it's 2/3 of all renewable energy. So wind and solar are growing, but bioenergy is still 2/3 of it. In Europe, it's approximately half of all the renewable energy that we use. So it is, going forward, it is seen as something that is going to world energy. The World Energy Organization expects that bioenergy will be 20% of all energy when we displace coal and oil and gas in years to come. So it is going to have a crucial role. There's two reports. I won't go into them that were done here to look at the Irish context. The 40 by 30 report, which we were involved in ourselves. If you go to webinar number 3 that we done, we go extensively into that report and you can see a lot of the details on that. But it's basically looking at getting 40% of all of Ireland's heating by 2030 from renewable sources. Principally, one of the main things in this that affects it is a large proportion. This is a graph within it of the amount of heat we use at different temperatures. And biomass is something that is needed for all of these high temperature uses. So industrialized heat, which is going to be something that will come up with in this topic. Not so much, not for domestic, but really for industrialized heating, where we're looking at large scale boilers. A couple of examples around the country that currently are at a scale where they can use brash, and some of them do, would be the likes of Danone and Wexford. SBH, Specified Biomass Harvesting, not brash. So that's a 4 megawatt. Stelis Pharmaceutical is a 1.8 biomass steam generator, IrBEA a 10 megawatt, and Leash Sawmills at 8. And there are others now that will get photos and add to the presentations as we go forward. But they're at a sufficient scale, and you're really looking at the large scale boilers. And it's a particular issue in how we decarbonize our large industry, our pharmaceutical, our dairy industry, and other industries around the country. They need high-end heat, they need heat at high temperatures, and the only way you can do that is by using biomass, or the best way and most cost-effective is by using biomass. So specified biomass harvesting really fits into that role. We may in future see district heating here in Ireland. We know it's a policy of government to roll out district heating within the domestic sector. So that is one area where material like SBH could have an input into domestic heating. There's just an example. I won't stay too long on it. Small town in Denmark, but there's several hundred towns around Denmark running on district heating, running on materials such as the SBH. And it really is an interesting space as time goes forward. So first and foremost, the principal thing here is that when we're producing any sort of material, that it is meeting the requirements of RED II, which is the Renewable Energy Directive, and that's the sustainability requirements. So when we are looking at producing SBH, we have to look at these criteria, and it is critically important. So the land use criteria: is it legal to harvest material? Are we managing the forest sustainably? And this is all part of the report. Are we looking at our greenhouse gas criteria, that we're reducing the emissions of greenhouse gas? And SBH fits in very nicely into that. and biodiversity protection. And again, this is a major part of the report in how we protect for forest regeneration, for protecting our watercourses, our sensitive wetlands and other areas, and that we continue to encourage biodiversity within the forest structure. So it's all extremely important that this is maintained throughout our operations, and the report does focus quite a bit on that area. So that's just a view of the report, that's front cover of it. So we will have printed copies, we can talk about that later on, but there is printed copies we expect to have possibly towards the end of the week that we can start distributing. And just a quick definition of SBH, it's the planned and specified biomass harvesting, comprising of tops and branches removed during roundwood harvest. It's piled in situ in the forest floor adjacent to the extraction racks and left for enough time for the needle and leaf to fall off before it's collected. It excludes material used to make brash mats or the removal off site. So it's critical, and one of the things we would like to get across today, we note a lot of the people that are watching today are involved in forestry. You would be used to the term brash, but we have to, and brash will continue as a material for driving on. It is not a material that you're going to extract from the site and use as a fuel or other product. So we have to really get used to using the term SBH, and it is going to take a little bit of getting used to. So in terms of the advantages of SBH, first of all, it does facilitate forest regeneration. Why do we do this? It avoids large windrows, which causes uneven growth in the subsequent crop. We see windrows going onto sites where they're of significant width, that the tree rows then in the next crop are pushed out. All those tree rows then become edge trees, so we've got lots of low quality material, so it's not usable for high quality lumber. So we're really affecting the quality of the next crop. So it's important to reduce the volume on site. We are getting more efficient subsequent crop management, so it's easier to move around, it's easier to manage that crop. It's reducing the severity of weevil damage. It improves site access for forest regeneration and for forest management. And it improves improves future management for tinning and felling. And it is also much better for nutrient dispersal. And this is a critical area that we haven't really looked at too much, but we will do in this report. But the return of those needles to the forest floor and return of all those nutrients is critically important, both in terms of the health of the forest, but also in terms of protecting our watercourses, because you do not want to see nitrogen and other nutrients going into our watercourses. So it's our siltation is another major issue there. So it does facilitate, when done correctly, it can facilitate the best management in that practice. It is also, the product itself is a cost-effective biomass fuel. So it has significant advantages, both in terms of cost and availability and quantity. And it does have significant greenhouse gas savings, largely because if you were to leave it on the forest floor, it is going to disintegrate within a matter of a year or two and release all that CO2. So by extracting the energy from it, it has an immediate, almost immediate impact on overall greenhouse gas emissions, being part of the carbon cycle. Again, just another note, SBH excludes the harvesting of the brash mat, and that distinction is critically important, and we'd hope that everyone walks away today knowing the difference between the two. So in terms of the aims of harvesting SBH, we're looking to minimize ground damage, minimize the water quality deterioration. So that's in terms of nutrients being washed into a local watercourse and siltation. So they're two critical areas. We're looking to maintain the site productivity into the next rotation, or if it's in continuous cover, to maintain that site productivity through continuous forest cover. We're looking to leave sufficient coarse woody debris, dead wood, branches, and other product from the forest which is dead wood and which is breaking down. That provides a vital resource for specialist invertebrates and other forest flora and fauna, for them to grow, for them to thrive. So it's important that we have a level of that left in situ. Further down, you can see there that the Forest Service biodiversity guidelines does state that for deadwood retention, you need to be leaving about 5 cubic meters per hectare on clear fell sites and 2 on tinning sites. So that's the current advice on it. So The other aim is to carry out the operations in accordance, again, with the Sustainable Forest Management Principles and the retention of the wildlife habitat as clear filing as set out in the Department of Agriculture standards for felling and reforestation. So it's critically important to fit in with that in terms of the certification of our forests, that this is done in the right thing. And Donald Whelan and others who've assisted us throughout this process have given very good guidance to us in how the document should concentrate on that. The protection of water and of soil and water, brash mats must be used where necessary, and the brash cannot be removed afterwards. Now, for those that are not, brash is basically material you're traveling on. We'll look at a couple of diagrams in a few minutes. So whether it's the harvester, whether it is the forwarder extracting out material, and they're driving on brash mats, that has to be left, and the brash must be used there to protect soil. Soil physical damage and erosion will cause siltation of the watercourses, so we need to watch out for that and make sure we're not causing damage that is going to cause the soil damage in itself. May not be too much of an issue. It's when it's the after effect of that through siltation and other things that happen. We must comply with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine standards for felling and reforestation. So the forest harvest plan will set out felling and removal of roundwood and SPH. So this is where it will be written in by the forest plan that we will be removing roundwood and a certain proportion of SPH. We will also be using a certain amount of the same material as a brash mat. SPH should be felled and piled as part of a final felling operation. So again, this is where it's really down, the harvester is key in all this. It is the harvest operator is going to be managing what material is going underfoot, what material is going to be kept as SPH, and keeping that separate. So it's critically important. It's not something you look at afterwards. It is at a point of harvest that this must be done correctly. So the SPH has to be placed in rows alongside the extraction racks and brash mats. So it's easy to remove and it's easy to maintain in a separate. They shouldn't be located within the water setback areas of an aquatic zone. And again, all in line with the standards for felling and reforestation. The extraction routes themselves should be carefully planned so that there's not excessive travel over the headlands. You're not affecting permanent watercourses. They should be identified and protected early on. And you should avoid large piles of SPH. There's a whole piece on that as well in terms of the nutrient recovery. We want to see the material spread out over as much of the forest as possible so that you're losing those needles in the right places. Obviously, enough periods of excessive rainfall will affect it, and they should be avoided in terms of harvesting. Depending on the nature of for whether it's harvesting SPH, that might not be possible in periods of excessive rainfall. You might need all of it underfoot, or you might have to hold off on harvesting altogether for some time. The soil type, the weather conditions, the site terrain, all of these things will affect how much material you're going to use as a brash mat and how much you're going to use as SPH. Or be able to recover as SPH. So it really is dependent on the site. It really is dependent on the weather. It really is dependent on the terrain. So if it's a heavily sloped site or a level site, will all have a major impact. Soil type obviously will have a major impact on that as well. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in the report. In terms of nutrient retention, another major impact of doing this correctly and why it must be done correctly is the nutrients. They tend to be concentrated in the leaf material, the needles, sometimes the bark to a certain extent. So if we remove excessive amounts of that, it's going to impact on the soil itself. It's going to impact by removing all those nutrients that are needed by the subsequent crop. We're going to impact soil fertility. The productivity going forward will be affected, and that is shown. And this goes back centuries from what they used to call raking in European sites, where to remove all this material from the forest floor, and it affected the overall fertility. So this is a well-known impact that if we're removing this material, it's going to have an impact if we remove the material with the nutrients. So also the fact that they're being moved and removed, it could be moved from one part of the site to the other, may have an impact where it could cause eutrophication. You could have some washout into watercourses, and it may also affect on the other end, the SPH. If you're using it as a fuel, you do not want excessive amounts of nutrients going in there, because it's, be it chlorine, be it nitrogen, it may have impacts in terms of corrosion with inside boiler systems. So it's critically important from a fuel point of view as well, that time is afforded for the needle to fall off and be retained on site. In terms of the good practice measures in terms of recovering those needles and foliage, it's very important in low productivity sites. The definition of that is, say, would be an example of a Sitka spruce site with a yield class of less than 12. Now, depending on the species, obviously, it will be different. So Sitka is quite a fast grower, so it'll be a lower yield class on other sites for oak or ash or something like that. In all cases, the proportion of material that will be left on site in brash mats and elsewhere, you're going to have brash. You're going to have an element of brash left there for travelling on. And that's, on most sites, will be unavoidable. There are sites where you will get good dry ground, and it will be may well be possible to travel with little or no brash, and parts of a site with little or no brash. But in general, it's something that is going to have to be managed on almost on a day-to-day basis as well as a site-by-site basis. It's not good practice to remove all of the residues, and you are looking for those residues, again, the leaf and needle material, to be maintained on site, and to return the nutrients. If you're removing those nutrients, another effect is soil acidification. So that's something that's a further effect, as well as the fact on the poorer and shallower soils, where it'll be exacerbated even more. It may be a case of, you mightn't look at removing material at all. It may be best to leave it all retained. You can add things such as wood ash to offset that, but that's something that may possibly be looked at in the future. In terms of just the layout itself, this is really the last 2 slides on the report, just detailing the report. We've looked at 2 different examples of how you're harvesting on site. So this is the first example, is where you've relatively good ground conditions. And if you look at our key over to the side, we have a light brash mat, basically for which the harvester travels on. You're selecting out your roundwood for harvest, and you're selecting out your SPH, which is for recovery as well. Now, in that, it's a light brash mat, your good ground conditions, so your forwarder, your extractor, can travel along these without causing any damage, and can lift out your roundwood, can lift out your SPH, and you're then left into a scenario of replanting. So that's a good ground condition where you're extracting quite a large amount of SPH for use. You're retaining a small amount of brash on site for travelling on. The next example we use then is where you've got, again, softer ground conditions. Conditions are not as good for travelling on. You do need to have, say, for example, a light brash mat under the harvester, but then on the extraction lines, you are going to need a heavy brash mat. And as a result of that, there are areas where you're not going to be able to recover any SPH at all. It's all going to go into the brash mat for travelling. And there'll be maybe we looked at the scenario areas, every second row will be for extraction, and the intervening row, you will be able to recover SPH on those, and that can be harvested. But again, there may be sites where that's not possible, where you need to have a heavy brash mat everywhere. So it really is site-specific, weather-specific, soil-specific, terrain-specific in terms of what can be done. In terms of the resource for SPH, we're estimating that there's different ways of estimating this, up to 150,000 tons of SPH could be harvested in the years up to 2030. But it really depends on the harvesting of stem, and how much material has been extracted in the first place, and how much forest is actually going for harvesting. We will see better figures coming out shortly from Coford, who are doing a study on this. We've some of our panelists maybe will talk a bit more in detail on this in a few minutes. But again, and we see that a lot of forest figures, the predictions are there, and not necessarily the harvests won't necessarily always match the predictions. But there is large volumes of this material available under certain conditions. So that's basically it. That's the presentation piece on it. Sean, I might hand back to you there.
Thanks very much, Noel, for your presentation. And if I could just ask Eugene and Kenneth and Donald to switch on your cameras. And if you could stop sharing, Noel, maybe that would be good too. Thank you. So maybe, Eugene, if I can bring you in first. I just see you're on mute there, Eugene. Yeah, thanks for unmuting. Would you just be able to introduce yourself, Eugene? I know you're a co-author with Noel of this report. just give an introduction to your own background and yourself, and maybe your broad perspectives on the report, and then we'll go into more specific questions with you then.
Okay, thanks, Noel, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I worked with Noel on this report. I chair the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme on behalf of IrBEA, and have a long interest in forest-based biomass as a potential to contribute to climate change mitigation and a sustainable supply of material. So, no, I just want to make the point that we put a lot of time and effort into the report, both from the practical aspect of harvesting, but also, as Noel has outlined to you there, in terms of the sustainability. I think it's really important that it's done well. It uses the guidance, if people are considering it, that it uses the guidance that's in the report, and the guidance is based on a lot of field experience over a long number of years. We've worked a lot on it in terms of how it can be practically done. So yeah, it needs to be done properly. We don't want to be taking brash out of the forest that's been used for extraction racks, because that's not good material from a number of aspects. As Noel has pointed out, it's the nutrient depletion side, and we want to maintain high productivity in our forests and avoid.
Do you want to explain, Eugene, just sorry to put across you the difference there? This is a specific biomass harvesting document. Do you want to explain the difference in that and brash? Do you want to just outline that?
We've all talked about brash harvesting over the years, and it's not brash harvesting, because you might get the impression that you take up the brash mats afterwards, but that's not what we're talking about here. It's there's a lot of different assortments, as we all know, in forest practice. So there's a roundwood, there's pulpwood, and there's sawlog. This is just another assortment. That's what it is. But the difference is, of course, you leave it in the forest for a sufficient amount of time for the needles to fall off, and that's really very, very important. Again, to emphasize that point, because we want to keep our forests productive, and it also avoids windrowing, which is important, because we've seen that windrowing leads to uneven growth in the forest subsequently after reforestation. So there's lots of win-wins there, and it's a potential source of material. Now, the potential is basically, obviously, very much related to the level of harvest. The overall level of harvest. I just want to emphasize that it's an important source, but it's not the main source of material by any manner of means. The main source is from thinnings and from residues, sawmilling residues, in terms of forest-based biomass, but it's a potentially important source. But again, to emphasize, it must be done properly. We want to sustain our forests, we want to sustain our productivity, and that's basically it.
Very good. Well, thanks, Eugene. We'll come back to you again now in a couple of minutes. So if I could bring in Donal maybe next, and then I'll bring in Kenneth. So Donal, do you want to just quickly outline your own role within the Irish Timber Growers and what your organisation does, and maybe give us some of your document?
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Indeed, the Irish Timber Growers Association, a representative body of private woodland owners, and I suppose my role as technical director is very much a technical forestry role, and I very much welcomed being invited onto the panel today, but also onto the small group that looked at designing this document, because we feel it's very important for growers. It's very important, I suppose, given the context of the operations, and given, I suppose, the fact that so much of our private forest estate is now coming to the stage of felling. We need to be planning for that, and we also need to be optimizing the return for growers. And I suppose I would see specified biomass harvesting as contributing to improving the returns for growers, and actually reducing the waste in forestry. And also from an environmental perspective, I see it as very much, it improves the environment, particularly in relation to the reduction in the need for windrowing, which can be, which can cause a lot of ground disturbance, and particularly now in a lot of sensitive areas.
Okay, thanks very much, Donal. And you mentioned some of the benefits, and what are the broader benefits to forest owners for this approach? Just if you want to maybe expand on what you were saying there in terms of what the broader benefits are.
Absolutely. And I suppose, well, the first one is I see it as improving returns for growers and minimizing waste in forestry. And I think that's going to become more and more important. Your one is optimizing and really streamlining forest operations. So if, for example, on a suitable site, and I know that Noel and Eugene have touched on this, and it is important that the sites are suitable for this operation. But where they are, it streamlines forest operations. It reduces the cost, particularly if you don't have to do windrowing over a lot of the site, and it increases the revenue because you're getting revenue then from the residues that were on site. So it's all very much a positive on suitable sites for growers. It reduces, of course, the cost of reforestation. And, this is something as a forest manager myself that I have very much seen, that on suitable sites, the cost of reforestation is reduced. It reduces the disturbance in the ground, and particularly, if you're windrowing on sites that maybe have, larger water catchments, one has to be very careful. And if you can reduce the windrowing requirement, and oftentimes harvesting is during the summer and in good weather, where this specified biomass harvesting can be undertaken. There's environmental benefits to that, because you're not going in again and doing ground disturbance, particularly in areas where there are aquatic zones. And it reduces, I suppose, the overall disturbance of the site. My own personal experience of it is, and I've done it on one particular site, literally on one side of Forest Road, and then not on the other. It did, in that case and in other cases where I've employed it, it has reduced the need for pesticide control of pine weevil. And that has been my experience, as I say, on a number of sites, but on one particular site where I did it on either side of the Forest Road. And it was a quite considerable reduction. In fact, where we undertook the specified biomass harvesting, we didn't have to use any pesticide in relation to control of pine weevil, whereas we did on the other side of the road. Also, it improves productivity for the next rotation within the forest. And if you look at anywhere where you windrowing can be very difficult. Oftentimes there can be a lot of material in the windrow, so you have these very wide windrows, and it reduces the productivity, and actually it complicates the future management and access into a forest. So that's very important for the grower. And also, I'd have to say that there have been issues in relation to forest certification and specified biomass harvesting. And I suppose the interpretation of the standards in Ireland and some of the department documents can lead to different interpretations being undertaken in relation to what can or what can't be done. And this document really, it's a very solid document, and it outlines where it's safe to undertake, if you like, from an environmental perspective, the specified biomass harvesting, and that's crucial in clarification in relation to certification issues that may arise in the future. So from that perspective, it's a document that really is critical to the future of the forestry sector. Not to mention it improves the potential for accessing sources of material for renewable energy and for bioenergy, and it helps achieve government targets in this in that regard. So the document is a critical document. I welcome very much IrBEA's involvement in it, and the Irish Timber Growers Association being involved in the design of it. And I think it's going to be really important, and it will be very important for the private sector going into the future. It allows then hopefully it will clarify where such specified biomass harvesting can be undertaken on forest sites. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Donal, for that very comprehensive overview of the benefits, and we'll come back to you again in a couple of minutes. I see there's a couple of questions coming into the Q&A tab, and again, any of our attendees who would like to ask questions, feel free to post them to the Q&A tab. I'd like to introduce you, Kenneth, now. Maybe could you tell us about your own organisation, your own company, what you do, and also maybe your comments on the document, and then we talk about the broader energy piece after that. So
thanks
over to
very
you,
much,
Kenneth.
Sean. Yes, and Donal and Eugene and Nolan as well. We've been working in harvesting timber and haulage over the last 30 years, but the last 10 years has been concentrating more and more on getting a system in place, the SPH in place, where we can take brash, which has been left on the ground, and taking the SPH off the site, which is the correct fuel for these large boilers. There's no contamination in the fuel, which is very important to the boilers. And as I said, we've been working for the last 10 years on this with different systems that work best. And yeah, we've got it to a stage that works very well for us. We're talking mainly here on clear fells, but in Tinnins we have changed our system as well, where we can get minimum of 50% more volume out of the forest, and our system allows us to protect the forest floor better. The extra volume is coming from all the small trees that are being left and not harvested in the first thinning, which is extremely important to get this product out in your first thinning, to get your clear fell stage a lot quicker. A big part of all this SPH, we got involved in, we had to get certification, and from certification we mean RED 2 compliance, which we are now, because it's all interlocked. But it gives, I suppose, it gives the grower the confidence that the company that's coming in, when we go in to do the job, we have to work to a high standard. We will lose this certification if we don't work to a high standard, and we have traceability also. Traceability came to us to a situation, we introduced a system called Logwatch, which gives the timber security, and then the SPH, which, not last or least, it's a big part of this, where it gives extra revenue to the grower, and it saves, as Donal mentioned, it saves costs on reforestation. I don't have to elaborate on that. I think Donal went through it all. But yeah, the revenue, I suppose, is very important to the grower, and to get back into his clear fell, or their clear fell, or her clear fell, and to be sustainably forest managed, that you get to a good value crop the next time around, because we are seeing that second generation, where the windrow was planted before, is having a serious effect on the timber quality and the production from the site. Also,
Okay. Yeah.
We talked about the needles, and the needles being left scattered all over the site. When you do your windrow, the windrow is actually the trees that have grown over the last 30 years, for example, they are losing a certain amount of needles. Those needles, when you go to do your windrow, you're actually taking the needles away from the part of the site that requires needles for nutrients, and you're pulling them into the windrow as well, because when you pull the branches across the site, a certain amount of needles will come with them. So now you have all your nutrients in the wrong part of the site, and you have less nutrients where you want the trees to grow the next time. By doing specified biomass harvesting system, the needles fall off where the piles are left, but then when you go to move the product to roadside, more needles will fall off and it'll be scattered all over the site. And this is very important going forward. And we see that from sites that we have done that are planted maybe 5-7 years ago. They're coming now, coming very consistent. It's an even pattern from the new plants that are coming, which is very important from harvesting. But if anybody wants any more information on it, you can Google us or call me on 087 2599 372. We have videos and text done up where people can get more information on it.
Okay, and can it just before I go back to the questions, could you maybe put in context what Noel mentioned about the overall energy, the benefit of this system from the point of view of mobilizing more renewable energy and renewable solid biomass? Can you maybe talk about that and what you see as being the opportunities in that regard?
Well, I suppose the real issue here, what I hear from potential customers for this product, they're concerned that will the product be there? If we can give them the confidence, the product will be there and the market will grow for this product. So it's a chicken and egg situation, and that leads this document to be extremely important to encourage people to put into biomass boilers because the product is there. And why not use it? Why leave it on the forest floor to rot and release carbon into the atmosphere? It's very good for the from a local. The money stays in the economy, basically, in the local economy, which is extremely important. Why use our energy source from outside the country when we have the energy source there? It's renewable. We can grow more of it if we want. It will encourage more farmers to grow and people to invest in forestry when they're getting a better return from forest. So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Okay,
I believe. And
just in terms of one final question for you, Ken, then, in terms of the types of systems that are taking this material, they're obviously of the larger type. So do you just want to expand on that? You know, they're larger biomass.
I'm a believer that the large biomass is what's going to make the difference here. You have to manage too many small plants and they're great, don't get me wrong, but the big ones will encourage it and the big ones will use this product. So it's a product that's rotting on the forest floor. It's going to waste anyway. Why not use it? And these bigger plants can use it.
Okay.
The product is there. Very
good. There's a number of questions in, so we will take the questions and allow you to come in. So you may or may not be able to answer, lads, but the first one there from Owen, will brash harvesting become part of the felling license regime? So again, it's using the word brash harvesting, but it must be specific biomass harvesting maybe that's being referred to. So who wants to take that, or does anyone want to take that?
I suppose just on we have sent a copy of this to the Department of Agriculture. They reviewed it. They've welcomed the guidelines, and they've stated that once published, they will circulate it to the forest inspectors as an example of good practice. So obviously there may be other situations to be considered as well, but I do welcome it as something that provides important information and guidance. So I think that's as positive as we can.
Right. Moving on then, and maybe Eugene, you could take this one. Has consideration been given to the integration of BECCS, bioenergy, with carbon capture and storage? And could the panel comment on how both SBH and BECCS potentially contribute effectively to climate action within the context of the LULUCF accounting? So it's do you want to have a stab at that one, Eugene? You're on mute there now. Yeah, you're unmuted.
Okay. Just first of all, on which we've talked about earlier, is about the savings from using SBH. And Ken Worrell referred to this, basically, it's the quickest way to get a climate gain from any forest assortment that you use for energy, because, as he said, if you leave the material on the ground, it decays back to the atmosphere. And there's been a lot of research work done on this in terms of displacing oil or gas or coal, that you can get greenhouse gas savings within 1 year, which is quite striking and quite important. So just on, without going into the next story, which I'll come to in a minute, but that's really, really important to realize that it's a combination of the displacement of the fossil fuel and the fact that the material is would be decaying anyway in the forest. The counterfactual case So yeah, that's without BECCS. Now, if you go for BECCS, BECCS is really a very exciting potential technology. It's called up in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change a lot. And basically what they're saying in the IPCC in terms of the net zero by 2050 and keeping the climate increase to 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade compared to historic levels, we basically need to mobilize technologies like SBH and conventional bioenergy, if you like. Well, modern bioenergy, I suppose we could call it, because it's sustainable and it is clean energy in the sense of the combustion cycle. So we already have those technologies there. But BECCS offers the opportunity to give us to combust biomass, to get an energy service, as they say, out of it, for heating or whatever, or it could be combined heat and power, and at the same time to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Because what happens is, if you have a scale operation, something along the lines that Ken is referred to, would probably be a bit larger. You can take the carbon that's emitted from the combustion of the wood and you can capture it and store it in geological storage. Obviously, scale is here and cost issues, and it's at an early stage of development and so on. But there's a lot of interest in it. In the UK, there's a couple of very large players there you may be aware of. We're looking at this very seriously. Where does the carbon dioxide go? It goes into former gas fields and oil fields, where it can be stored for up to 1,000 years, at least. There's a lot of good science around this, and if you're interested in it, you can go onto the British Geological Survey website. They have an excellent exposition of what BECCS can do. So I see BECCS as being part of the future. It's a removal. You might hear a lot about carbon capture and storage from fossil fuels, but that's not a removal. It's just status quo. It doesn't do anything for the climate. So in terms of the climate, we need to take out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We need to remove it. So basically, there's a lot of potential for BECCS. It's at an early stage. It needs scale, but the technology is there, and I think it's going to be part of our energy future in terms of addressing climate change.
And it was mentioned in the Climate Action Plan that was published just before Christmas as an area for exploration in Ireland. So we guess in the next number of years, we'll see further developments in this area. So if we move on to the next question, thanks, Eugene, for your comments. Again, if any of our other panelists want to comment on any of these questions, feel free to come in. So maybe question for Noel there from Colm. When will the guidance document be published? So that's the first part. It's on our website, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on
the IrBEA website, available currently. If you just put in SBH IrBEA, it should come up on Google for you. The second part of the question is, when and how will the department include these guidelines in their felling licenses? Currently, it is this individual's understanding that any harvesting of what we do now called specific biomass harvesting is illegal and not an encouraged practice by DAFM. Could all panelists comment on this, please? So, Noel, do you want to comment on it first?
Well, I suppose first off, they have welcomed it. They are going to send it out to their inspectors. I mean, really and truly, they wanted a guidance to be able to show the inspector to be able to. I mean, I'm not directly involved in forest certification myself, so maybe some of the other panelists would have a better handle on this. But I mean, it gives them grounds to actually show how it can be harvested sustainably alongside their best practices in forestry management. Don't know, Donal or Ken or Eugene, you might have a better handle on that.
Okay, yeah, Donal, want to come in there? Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, it's a good question because it reflects the uncertainty that there is out there in relation to specified biomass harvesting. and you know, it reflects, I suppose, what a lot of foresters and owners may think. Now, my understanding, and obviously I can't speak for the department, but my understanding is, and it's you will see it in the standards for felling and reforestation, it may not be encouraged in certain circumstances, but I don't believe it's prohibited. I don't believe there's anything specific there that does not allow specified biomass harvesting. But there is uncertainty, and that's, I suppose, the reason that the document was produced. It's why the Irish Timber Growers Association were so keen to get behind IrBEA and work on this document, because of that uncertainty. And that uncertainty and the interpretation, I suppose, of those standards for felling and reforestation of 2019, I suppose, shows the importance of this document and where, I suppose, where it'll be placed in the future. I think it's great that the department have welcomed the document and are circulating it. And I think, you know, what I suppose I would encourage the department to do is to adopt it as a part of their suite of guidelines, because it has been a very well crafted document and reflects, I suppose, the environmental concerns in the sector, and I think improves the environmental sustainability of forestry, where I suppose where all the constraints that are within the document are put into place. So I think it can only help in the future. And okay. So thanks.
Thanks, Donald. And I just see there are a number of people raising their hands, but unfortunately, just the nature of this webinar, we won't be able to bring in people who have their hands raised. But if people could just put their comments in the chat or in the Q&A, we could read them out. So just thank you for
Sean, if I may, just
Eugene, yes,
on this point, I think it's obviously Donald has explained and rationalized it quite well there. I think, as I said in my first intervention, I think we need to focus on this as an assortment harvest, right? It's not scraping up material from the forest floor with all, with soil and so on. It's an assortment harvest, and it's a sustainable harvest of an assortment when you let the needles and leaves or whatever the foliage go back into the forest. So we need to think about it as an assortment that's well planned in advance. It's planned out. It's part of the felling operation. It's not willy-nilly. So I think that's really a key point.
Okay, Ken, do you want to come in on that question from Colin, just about the points that he raised?
I'll make it short and sweet. I think his economic benefits and economic benefits and environmental benefits, and does not really say it all. I mean, isn't that what it's all about here?
Yeah.
The environment and the economy side of it as well. So.
Okay. Next question from Nicholas, and thanks for joining, Nicholas. In terms of CCF, continuous cover forestry, where individual trees are being felled rather than rows, would the panel suggest SPH could be collected economically? So I don't know who wants to come in on that.
It definitely in your first innings, it depends on ground conditions, but definitely using the practice is beneficial. Whether you get all that product to roadside or not, it will depend on the ground. So in most situations we use it, but the product could be used to go back onto the extraction lines if the extraction lines, for example, got worse. And that can happen a lot in thinnings where you're extracting timber out. You have to travel on that one spot, but when you're traveling a lot of times on the one spot, that needs extra product. So that means in a thinning situation, you can't, in a standard harvesting, it's very hard to take the product that's from underneath the harvester. But when you leave it to one side, you have two choices. If you need it to go underneath the harvester in another part of the forest, underneath the harvest forwarder, which is a big concern in extraction, you can lift it with the forwarder because it's left either side of the extraction line, and you can put it down where it's required. If it's not required, you take it to the roadside. But if it is required, it's protecting the forest floor. Like I said, the normal way of harvesting, you have no product to put into those areas that have been traveled a lot or oftentimes the wet areas have smaller trees and less trees, so you have less product underneath you. You can move this product to that area.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that particular point about continuous cover forestry? No? Okay. Moving on to the next question from Oisin. How will, this for you, Noel, how will SPH fit within the WQA scheme? And is it envisaged that this material will only be suitable for more large or non-domestic applications?
Yeah, look, it can be certified. It comes in under the ISO 17225 standard. So for the sort of material, look, it is more suitable for larger installations. I mean, brash in itself, sorry, SPH in itself, you can't see it being used in a domestic stove setting. You know, it's not Barry going to be shoveling it into it, and it may not be dry enough. You know, it's really a material for industrial settings. So I would see the only place it might come in the domestic really is in district heating systems. It would definitely be suitable there. And there may be possibility to use it in a manufactured product like briquettes for household use.
Thanks, Noel. Question from Binny, and again, thanks, Binny, for joining this morning. Is there an option to use the brash? Well, I assume you mean the specific biomass harvesting material as a feedstock to produce bio-based, zero-embedded carbon, locally produced insulation to adhere to circular economy principles and keep money in the local economy. You referred to the fact that you did a study a few years ago and it appeared feasible. So,
yeah,
Noel, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, because I've done a piece of work on that myself in terms of insulation and other products coming out of biomass materials. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's a product that's coming out. There may be many different economic uses of it, and insulation, biochar. There's lots of different options we could look at in using it. Fuel is definitely the one that's there where we can use lots of it at the moment, and will always be there as a use. But absolutely, if there's higher value uses, it's there to use.
Okay, a question there from an anonymous attendee. Given Ireland's need to district heat 200,000 homes and 25,000 public buildings, mainly in wood biomass by 2030, how is it going to be achieved when the Minister for the Environment is on record as opposing wood energy? So I don't know who wants to comment on that. I suppose broadly we would see that the government hasn't written in solid biomass into a lot of their climate action plans and other documents as being recognized for the potential it has. So that is a concern from our perspective as an association. But this question is in that line. So does anyone want to comment on that? Donald, Kenneth, Eugene, or Noel? Just to remind our attendees, we are coming to the end of our webinar this morning. So if you have any final questions, please post them in the Q&A tab because we'll be concluding in the next minute or two. So does anyone want to comment on that question?
Yeah, I think the questioner,
No,
it's Donald Magner has identified himself there. He's come in as anonymous. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a very suitable material for district heating and for large scale use. And I think we do need stronger policy soundings from the minister, because we are aware that larger industry really have identified this material as potential and would like to use it for decarbonising. They don't see electrification as technically possible for them. Hydrogen is years away if it's ever going to be there. And they really see decarbonisation coming from biomass, I see in other European countries, but they're afraid that they're not getting the correct signals from government in this country, and we could do with a little bit more verbal support from the minister. Sorry, Eugene.
Okay, does anyone, Donald, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just a quick one. It's an important point that's been made there. What I will say is, I suppose there hasn't been a document that like this in relation to specified biomass harvesting. Maybe there has been uncertainty around that type of harvesting. It's important. It's entirely environmentally and indeed economically and socially sustainable. And I think with this document in place, it'll give IrBEA and other organisations like the Irish Timber Growers Association an opportunity to go back to the said minister and indeed our own minister and highlight the potential benefits of such specified biomass harvesting. So I think this is an important step in the right direction. Thanks.
I think, as I said, this is only a relatively small proportion of the but it's an important enough one of the overall bioenergy harvest. Look, we're over 80% dependent on fossil fuels still in this country, 80% and over. So I think, the policy really needs to orientate around what's feasible and possible. And bioenergy, all forms of bioenergy, be it solid biomass or biomethane, have a significant role to play in terms of, renewable input into our energy system. So I think we're not going to get there just by the current policy mix, in my view. So we need to, any sustainable and cost-effective technology really needs to be looked at seriously in terms of achieving our energy and climate change targets.
Okay, thanks very much, Eugene. Just to Ken,
just add quickly, Sean, RED 2 compliance means we're working to a high standard. What's the problem then? Why is this not encouraged when it's being seen to be done correctly?
And that's a kind of, that's echoed in a kind of our final, I would say, more of a comment than a question from Thomas. The department has to do more than welcome the document. This is the opinion of the attendee, has to do more than welcome this document. It must be accepted as part of the felling and RE4 standard. This standard is currently under review and will be going for public consultation shortly. So I guess, look, we'll have engagement with the department in the next couple of weeks again, and can ensure that they're fully aware of the document. So if I could just conclude by asking maybe everyone to say just a concluding remark. So Noel, do you want to give a very quick concluding remark, because we are over time and I want to wrap this up?
Yeah, no, look, I think just if we can get this embedded into forestry practice as quickly as possible, and again, look, to final acknowledgement to thank everyone here that's helped in producing the report, and co-author Eugene, and everyone here, and also there's a few external as well which we've named in the report that helped us throughout.
Donal, do you want to, I'm just taking you in terms of how you're on my screen. Donal, do you want a concluding remark, Donal?
Absolutely. I mean, effectively, this is a very important document. It's great to see the various different organizations come together to put it in place. And simply, I suppose, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for forest owners, obviously, in reducing costs, increasing returns. It's a win for the environment where it's done, where it's undertaken professionally by foresters and as part of the harvest plan, as Eugene has pointed out. And it's a win for the state because it'll allow us achieve our climate change targets. So it's a very important document and a step in the right direction. Thanks.
Okay. Kenneth, do you want to have your concluding remark, and then we'll leave the last word to Eugene? I
would just like to thank from back in 2014 when we started to do this, Donal and Eugene input, Noel and yourself input, and I think it's a very positive step forward from a certification point of view, which was a stumbling block for us. Certification wasn't really going to go in the right way, as Donal mentioned first, and I think it's extremely important that we get this moving as fast as possible. And thanks for everybody's help on the matter.
If we can give you a word, the last word, and then I'll conclude.
Okay, thanks. I just want to thank all my fellow people who worked on the document, Noel Gavigan for putting it all together, and Teresa O'Brien from IrBEA. And look, it's a sustainable assortment that we need to look at seriously and do it well in the forest, and it'll make a significant contribution, I believe, to the biomass supply stream in the future, and addressing our renewable energy and climate change targets.
Okay, thanks Noel, thanks Donal, thanks Kenneth, and thanks Eugene for your contributions this morning. I'd like to also thank all our attendees for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend our webinar. I'd like to acknowledge the work, as Eugene has said, of Teresa O'Brien in terms of this document, but also in terms of organising the webinar and the webinar series. So we will conclude on that, and we look forward to bringing you back to our next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks' time. Talk to you all then. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.